Just to remind people, if you can, stay on mute if you're not talking. Again, if people want to raise questions using the hand, obviously that's fine to do so. But it's easier probably to use the chat function. We are recording this, so if you don't want to be on video for posterity, then keep your video switched off, and we will pop this video of this meeting on the faculty intranet afterwards for people that haven't been able to join us live for it. First things, I'm delighted that we've got 3 of our new leadership team members here today, and as I said, I've asked them all just to do a quick hello. So if I can pass over to Maria Camper, our new head of the BSF, she'll say a few words. Maria.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Maria Camper, as Vicky mentioned. So as we start our journey together, I wanted to share some background on myself, my priorities and aspirations. So I'm a veterinarian, PhD and MBA with 20 years experience as director of animal facilities. I spent 10 years as the director of Alexander Fleming Animal Facilities in Greece, 4 years at EMBL in Rome, 2 years at Novartis headquarters in Basel, Switzerland, and 4 years at Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, Sweden. As of the 29th of March, I'm the new director of BSF. It is an incredible honor for me to lead and serve this great organization. And as for my priorities, through careful reviewing of the animal care and use program and the feedback from a survey addressed to the local research community, I'll identify areas for improvement in both modus operandi and infrastructure, propose necessary changes and identify unmet needs from the researchers and try to satisfy them. My main goal is to promote the culture of care for both animals and staff and partnership between staff and the researchers. Many of you have asked me, why am I here? What are my first impressions? So I'm here because we have unparalleled capacity to make an impact. Many organizations aspire to change the world, but very few have all the elements necessary and required: talent, resources, and perseverance. FBMH at UOM has proven that it has all 3 in abundance. And as the new director of BSF, I can't ask for a better foundation. So let's build on this foundation together. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. That's really, really helpful. Thank you. So next, I'd like to ask Mark Richardson, our Director Head of Planning, Governance and Compliance, just to say a few words.
I'm happy to take a promotion. Morning, everyone. Lovely to see so many faces, though so small that it's hard to make anyone out. As Vicky said, I'm here as head of planning, compliance and governance. Many of you will know Rebecca Moss, who's the substantive role holder. She's been seconded to work on the SEP. So I'm here for a defined short period, principally with a focus in the first instance on supporting the faculty in building its 5-year plan. And you're going to hear more from me this morning on that. More broadly, I think there's work we can do to improve some of our oversight of our relationships with the various NHS trusts. I think there's work we can do to streamline some of our governance and compliance work. So looking forward to working with a broad spectrum of colleagues as we take this forward. Just in terms of my own background, my career's spanned working as a researcher for a political lobby group through to an IT consultant and then into working in higher education. I was at Durham University most recently in a role as faculty manager, which is somewhere, in terms of responsibility, somewhere between head of planning role and director of operations role. So I have quite a lot of experience across both the planning and the operational side of things, which hopefully will provide some reassurance that I'm not someone who's going to be planning in a way that's disconnected from reality. as I know occasionally planners are accused of. So very much looking forward to working with you all.
Thanks, Mark. And finally, Jenny.
Hello, everybody. I'm Jenny Stewart, and a bit like Mark and Maria, I'm going to talk a bit about myself and then what I'm hoping to achieve for the faculty. So most of my career has been focused around higher education and specifically around medical and health, one way or another. And that sounds a bit odd when you think about the fact that I started at Coventry University and then moved into publishing before then making my way via Janet, a network technology company, to universities as disparate as the Royal Agricultural University and Ravensbourne, which is mostly arts, to the University of Manchester. But the Blackwell and Wiley part of it, which is the publishing part, and I know any librarians there are probably spitting tacks about working for a publisher, but still, I did. And it was academic publishing primarily, and it was publishing nursing and health books and journals. So that's the bigger part of my career. When I first joined, I was asked to give first impressions, and I have to say that first impressions were that you're all very friendly, that you're all very busy, that you're all ambitious. There's a lot of collective brain power available, which is great. You're really quite proud of working for the University of Manchester, but you're also quite modest. And so dragging the stories that we can shout about is going to be quite tough, I think, because you're a bit shy about telling us the good news. I'd also say that you're liars, because I was told that the sun always shines in Manchester. And whilst that's true today, I don't believe it's true every day. But my ambitions really for what we're going to do, really to hone in on our audiences, our target audiences, and make sure that we've really pinned down who we want to get to, and then look at the channels that we're using. And that's absolutely everything, internal and external audiences. So email internally and externally, but also our websites internally and externally. And the website, social media, all of those kinds of things are really important. And whilst that's my job, I'd also say that if you ever have had a social media account, then welcome to marketing and communications, because you're one of the team now, because anything you say reflects on the university as a whole. So I bet you didn't know you worked in communications and marketing, but you do. Welcome to the team. In terms of what I'm hoping is that we'll be able to really tell our stories better and more loudly, and really have them resonate better with the audiences that we're trying to get to. And so that's my plan. We're just looking at what and how we set about that, and how we can work together across the faculty to make that happen. So I'm looking forward to working with you all. If I haven't met you already, I expect I will.
Thank you. Thanks, Jenny, and thanks all of you. It's really helpful just to get that kind of overview of how your impressions of us when you first started at the university. It's always nice to kind of remember some of the things, the great things about the university and the faculty that sometimes we forget when we've been here for a while, or we're kind of just busy just doing the do. So thank you all for that. I just wanted to raise a couple of operational things really before we get into the kind of the planning side of things. So firstly, just a reminder to people, we have elections open at the moment for places on the faculty committee. This is a really important faculty that has obviously both elected members, students, PS and academic and research staff, working with the executive to pick up issues of importance across the faculty, and it is a really effective, I think, forum for us to discuss kind of key issues that are coming up. The elections are open at the moment for so academic and research staff vote for academic and research reps, PS staff vote for PS reps. The elections are open at the moment for 3 academic reps and for 1 PS. So if you haven't voted already, please, I would encourage everyone to do so. And the election is open until the 27th. So a couple of things just about kind of obviously where we are at the moment, and kind of some operational things around where we are and the next sort of steps in terms of the roadmap and those kinds of areas. So I think people will be aware that there was a statement from the government that students should not return until 17th of May, and there shouldn't be any change in academic activity. And then clearly, by the time we get to 17th of May, there's not a massive amount of teaching going on. So our assessment is that that's not a major amount of change for us with the 17th of May position, but that we will keep that under review. Clearly, that's in line with assuming that the government roadmap continues as planned, and obviously we're keeping a close eye on that and trying to plan as best we can in the absence of kind of concrete positions, but you know, I think we're all getting hopefully increasingly used to that. I think the real question is about obviously the 21st of June, if things go to plan in terms of the government's roadmap and what that actually means. And what we're starting to try and do at the moment is to start to think through, on the basis that things do happen as is kind of envisaged, and that means there is, you know, that start of a return to something that is a new normal. What that means for us, how we can start to think about planning through a phased return for people to come onto campus more of the time. And what that will look like. I think what we're not going to have is a kind of a big bang, everyone back, because that wouldn't be helpful, clearly, because we'd still need to kind of have the sort of things around making sure we've got the COVID secure environments in place, social distancing sorted, etc., etc. So we're starting to think through what that might look like, and obviously, and there may well be questions about this, I'm sure, you know, we're also thinking about what that might look like in terms of starting to think about a more hybrid work pattern that both works for what we need people to do, but also can support people, given the very clear feedback we've had that a lot of people would like to have a more flexible feel about both location and times of working. So there's a lot of work being done to think about that, and there will be a pilot put in place to start to think through what that means, but clearly that will need to be done looking across teams. It's not just about individuals asking for a different, you know, way of working and that being done on an individual basis. It will need to be looked at across areas of activity, and there's clearly a lot of complexity around all of that, and you know, we're trying to set some framework around that, but not too many hard and fast rules, because it will need to evolve. So, I mean, you know, the main message at the moment is obviously to continue to work as currently. I know we've had a lot of questions about having face-to-face meetings on campus, and we sent out across the faculty a clarification around that last week, which was essentially, if you're on campus anyway and you've got the appropriate social distancing in place, you can have face-to-face meetings, but we shouldn't be expecting people to come onto campus specifically for a meeting if they are mainly working from home. So, I mean, you know, we will continue to adapt and flex this as we go along. And I'm very aware that there is a lot going on, and you know, as we kind of move back to more normality, we're getting more and more kind of questions about how we're utilising our space, opening up more spaces. We've been looking at the study space available to our students. We've been looking at the lab spaces and how we can use those better. And we're also starting to think about planning for semester one next year and what that looks like. And again, you know, this ongoing challenge that we are probably going to have to, well, we are going to have to plan both for a socially distanced way of working and for a more normal way of working. So again, at university and at faculty level, we're starting to sort of work through and say, what does that look like? I know there's a lot of work already going on around areas like timetabling, which obviously with social distancing and more students back on campus are a particular challenge, but working through all of those areas alongside more areas. And of course, we've got all the challenges of just not knowing about student numbers because of teacher assessed grades again. So we are trying to work through that. I know many of you will be involved in that work that we're doing. we will get more information out to people and work with people who have got the expertise and the knowledge in areas as we work through this. But clearly there are things that we need to put within an institutional and or a faculty framework, and there are other things which can be done much more locally. So again, we're trying to get the right balance of that. I imagine there's examples where, well, I know there are examples where we don't always get it right, but I think if we continue to have that discussion and flag up things that are working well and things that are not working so well, we can try and work together to help continue to do things as well as we can. That's all I really wanted to say on the kind of operational side. There's nothing in the chat at the moment. I don't know if anybody's got any questions they want to raise on that before we get onto the planning side of things. No? Okay. I mean, if people do think of things, obviously you can ask us outside the meeting, or you pop something in the chat and we can pick it up later. So as I mentioned earlier on, we put a faculty framework, a faculty strategy in place just before COVID struck. And we're now kind of going back to that to think about, so, what is it we want to do? And go back to sort of what Maria and Mark and Jenny were saying, we are an exceptional university. We do some amazing things, and what we want to do is to build on that and to make things better. So we're doing a lot of work at the moment to think about how we do that and how we build on our success and our real areas of strength in a way that is financially sustainable. And of course, financial sustainability is always a challenge. Every year, I know we have this conversation about, that there's no money. But I think and it's not true there is no money, but it is true that we need to focus on our areas of strength and understand how we can build on those and make things better. So we're going through quite a big exercise at the moment to think about what that looks like for each of our areas across the university, and I'll let Sinead and Mark talk about that in a bit more detail. But just to say, I think there is a clear view from FLT that we do need to change the mix of what we do. We need to look at the way we're doing our teaching, and we need to look at the mix of our students with a view to having a higher proportion of international students, probably not bigger numbers overall, but looking at what that mix of students looks like and how that works in terms of the expertise of our staff and ensuring that we've got the right portfolio, both for the people that are teaching and for the market. Alongside that, we do need to look at how we're teaching. Obviously, COVID has helped us with that in terms of looking at the more blended and online approaches, but also about our teaching efficiency and effectiveness and what that looks like overall. Alongside that, it's obviously critical that we look at our overall academic activity together. We know that we are very reliant on charities income for our research, probably more so than other similar faculties, research-intensive faculties, and that has the challenge of not bringing with it as high a level of overheads and contribution as some of the forms of funding. So that's again something else that we need to look at. But all of this in terms of focusing on our strengths and really looking at investment in those areas of activity which are really about building the strength and the world-leading excellence of the faculty within the context of the university. And what that then means is that, we need to think about what that means for our academic endeavour and the contribution of academic staff, but also what it means for PS staff as well. So we as PS staff should ensure that what we're doing is also working towards those objectives in the faculty and making sure that we're all making that contribution that aligns to where the faculty is getting to. And again, that will probably mean some changes to some of the things that we do that builds on some of the changes we're already making. Many of you will have been involved in the recent discussions we've been having about the emerging plans for SEP, and that is all about driving towards those objectives that we have. So I will pass over to Sinead, who's going to give us some of the financial context. And this is very timely because our budget for next year is being submitted to the university today.
Thanks, Vicky. I think I have a presentation, which Ian's going to. Thank you. For anyone Irish on the call, I feel like a bird going roll at their Roisin, which is a reference to the Late Late Show. An iconic, was it, the chat show in Ireland. So I think we'll just kick right into it, Ian. So if you want to go to the next slide. Just before we start, I'm going to go through some of the financial jargon that we use within the faculty before I start just throwing it about willy-nilly on the assumption that everybody knows it. And I think most of these do, but it's never a bad thing to refresh and make sure that we all have a consistent understanding of what we mean. So OOE, otherwise known as other operating expenditure, also used to be known as non-pay, relates to all expenditure for goods and services. So these are the consumables that we use in the labs. These are the courses we send people on. It's anything really that isn't pay, hence the old title of non-pay. So effectively our utilities, rents, everything will go through this. Tuition fees, this is the income received for teaching our students. I think we all know that. Research income is the income we receive from funding bodies to support research with agreed outcomes. So again, I think we all know that. Contribution is a tricky one because I think everybody has a slightly different variation of their understanding of what this is. But in simplest term, this is generated in each faculty and our commercial areas, and it is the calculation of all of our income less all of our direct costs. And the term contribution is the amount generated by each of the faculties and commercial areas to cover the university's overheads. So, and again, overheads, just to clarify what that means, that's the cost of running the overall university, which are not allocated out to the faculties. So I am technically an overhead for this faculty because I am not charged directly to FBMH. My costs are held in the Central University, as are my entire team's costs, as well as states costs, as well IT costs, as well the general utilities costs for the organisation. So our electricity, our water, our heating, all of that stuff all sits in the Central University. So everything that we create, or all the money that we leave after we take out our direct costs, goes into the university to cover those overheads. Essentially, it's the cost of running the place. And then funding body grants is another big area of income for us. This is the money we receive from OFS, previously known as HEFCE, and via QR, which is the quality related research funding. QR is generally driven through, three channels: as charity, industry, and mainstream, which is driven by the REF process, which I'm sure any of you who've ever worked in research was more than familiar with over the past few years. So that's just as a bit of a starter for 10. And apologies for all of you who already know this, but just it's useful. Do you want to go on to the next page, please, Ian? So I thought it was useful, obviously going into a 5-year plan, let's not lose sight of where we are today. So how are our finances this year? So again, just to explain some of the terminology that we're going to use here, we will talk to everybody about three things: actuals, budgets, and forecasts. Actual is the actual money that we spend on a monthly basis, or actual money that we earn on a monthly basis and over the course of the year. Every year we have a budget round, which we're, as Vicky said, we're just about to finish up this year. And I think all of us who've been working on it will be delighted. It seems to have been going on for the 6 months. This is an annual process where finance and planning work with the budget holders in the faculty to plan the things we want to do and how much income and cost that will create for the faculty. And every month we will then do a faculty forecast, which will look to how much contribution we will earn by the end of the year. So put simply, we use the information available to us to predict the income and costs in the faculty. And we hope that our Magic 8 Ball gives us an answer that's akin to what we will actually do. So on that basis, our total contribution for the faculty has been up this year compared to budget. So we forecast that it will be 68.3 million. Our budget is 64.1, so we're up 4.2. So this is good news. This is a good thing for us as a faculty. Our tuition fee, so this is driven by tuition fee, been up by 3.3 million. Unfortunately, our research income was down by about 16.1 million, but that was offset by research expenditure being down by 15.1 million. So we offset that. That's the thing with research, and it was an income and expenditure. They're so heavily linked that as one drops, the other one should drop with it. So you should see very little impact on your contribution in the round. Our pay costs have been down 0.6 million. So we budgeted that we would spend 124.9. We so far have only, we predict that we will spend 124.3. And our other operating expenses are down by 3.8 million, which is a significant sum. I will say there are some accounting adjustments in there, so that's probably more favourable to us than it should be. And we've had some big one-off costs this year as a faculty that we've had to absorb, such as the AV Hill fire costs, etc. So that's how we're looking this year. So it's fairly positive. But I think if we just go through to the next slide, there's some learnings and some considerations that we need to take. So as I said, we are on track to have a successful year, but we need to look at some of our costs in more detail, specifically our salary and our other operating expenses. If we look at our counterparts in FSE and homes, they've both increased their students by significantly more than FBMH, but have achieved greater savings against their salary and their operating expenses budget than we have. So this basically boils down to they are using their staffing and their operating expense budgets more efficiently and effectively than we are. And there is some learnings for us in there. Now, I accept that we are not directly comparable to either faculty because we have traded through this in a slightly different way than either of those. And even though FSE is as research intensive as us, because of the nature of our teaching and the nature of our research, we were up and running in something that's slightly more akin to normality than either of the other two faculties. But we do need to look at that as we walk through the 5-year plan, how we can use the resources available to us more efficiently and more effectively so that we can contain our costs and hold them down as lowly as possible so that we can start to maximize that contribution that we're bringing back into the university. The benefit of us doing that, and I know that sounds hard because there is a lot going on in this faculty, is that that additional contribution, and by holding those costs down for our BAU, that's how we develop the headroom or the additional money to be able to invest in some of the areas that we feel are strategically important to us as a faculty. Without us being able to do that and without us prioritizing our spend, we won't necessarily be able to create that wiggle room that we really want to be able to do. So we know there's some amazing areas of research and teaching in this faculty that we really want to keep investing in. The other thing I think is worth noting, and this is just picking up on a point that Vicky made in her was an intro, we do have a lot of charity funded research. And we often look at the contribution that we make in research in the faculty and explain how low it is compared to, say, FSC, which is probably the most directly comparable within the university, down to our charities. But actually, I think there's a more interesting story if we look under our research income and look at that on a research funder type basis. You will note that we are underperforming FSC on our ability to get a contribution from our research on a funder by funder basis. So on a research council grant, for every £1 FSC bring in, they put 32p back into overhead coverage. We only put 30 pence back in. So we are spending 70p instead of 68p compared to FSC. And I think that's something that we need to think about. And that continues down through the trend. UK government, we are spending about 17p more in the pound than FSE. We are under recovering on EU government. Our industry recovery of contribution is significantly lower than FSE's. And really that's an area of focus for us, that we need to get much, much better at at getting contribution out of our industry grants. And on other, FSE are massively outperforming us. I haven't compared this to homes because there is a significantly different research base there, but FSE are equally lab orientated. They have significant core facilities in the same way that we do. So whilst the research isn't exactly the same, it is probably more comparable. And I think this is an opportunity for us walking through into the 5-year plan to look at how we can maximize that contribution. Are we doing our costings properly? Are we making sure that we're getting as much against the grant as humanly possible within the rules of the funder to ensure that the university are not having to underwrite any more of the research than they need to do? And again, if we start getting things like this right, that allows us that freedom to invest into the future more than we would do if we continue on as we are. So I'll let Mark take over and talk to everybody about how that's going to lead into the 5-year plan. Thank you.
Thanks, Sinead. I'm just going to share my presentation as well. Can someone who's got their camera on just nod so I know that you can see that? Yeah, perfect. I suppose both Vicky and Sinead have referred to the 5-year plan. And I just want to take a slight step back and actually think about what we mean when we're talking about building a 5-year plan. One of the accusations that's often laid at the doors of planners is that we overcomplicate things in detail or process or jargon. And actually, I have a pretty simple view of what we mean by strategic planning, which is that strategic planning is about knowing what you want to look like in the future, and in this case, 5 years from now. And then how do you get from where you are now to that point? And I don't think strategic planning at its fundamental level needs to be any more complicated than that. Clearly, there's a lot of work that needs to go into thinking about actually what is achievable, how ambitious are we. But when we talk about strategic planning, I don't want anyone to switch off and think about, well, actually, that's not to do with me. Because actually strategic planning is something that's core to what all of us do. I often, in these kind of presentations, put the question to a group, what's the point of strategic planning? And often get some quite rude answers back. So I'm just going to give you my view of what the point of strategic planning is. The first thing is that it's important that as an organization, we know where we're heading so that we're consistent in the direction that we're taking. If individual parts of the faculty set off on a trajectory which is different, so to pick up on one of the things that Vicky said about the need to rebalance our student community to be more international. If we have different parts of the faculty taking different approaches, radically different approaches to student number planning, our collective outcome is not going to achieve that shift in balance. So one of the important things about strategic planning is giving us a clear sense of where collectively we're heading. That doesn't mean that everyone has to follow exactly the same path to get there, because clearly there are differences in disciplines, there are operational differences. But having that sense of where we're heading is important to shape what decisions we make on a day-to-day basis. And a good strategic plan will really help us to make those decisions. If we have a strategic plan which sets out what our priorities are over the next 5 years, we can then weigh our day-to-day decisions. And when I talk about weighing decisions, partly that's at FLT level, making big strategic decisions, but also within individual teams, thinking about how we prioritize our time. Having a clear set of objectives and priorities helps us to decide where we invest our time and energy. I think the third thing that a good plan will do is enable us to devolve decision-making down from the senior leadership to a more local level, because it builds a sense of confidence that we know what we're trying to achieve collectively. And that then enables senior leadership to put that trust into local managers and local teams to be able to make decisions on a day-to-day basis consistent with that overall trajectory. So if that's what I see as strategic planning, I suppose the next thing that people will typically say is, well, we spend a lot of time planning already. What's different about this? And I've kind of mapped out the various documents within faculty that we've built up by way of planning documentation, which attempts to set out where we're heading over the next few years. And one thing that's immediately obvious is that there are a lot of documents here. Jenny used a very nice phrase earlier that there's a lot of brain power in this room and in the faculty. And that often translates to a massive surplus of ideas and ambitions. And I think that's reflected in many ways in where we're at in terms of our planning. This is a slide that I presented to FLT about 7 days ago, and I thought it was helpful to share the slide verbatim with this wider group. Essentially, this is my initial reflections coming in, almost taking a kind of consultant's view of where we are in terms of our strategic plan. I think, as I just alluded to, I think there's a bit of a lack of definition in what we want to look like in 5 years. Individual areas have some very positive, good ideas about what they want to do over the next few years. And the faculty framework sets an overarching narrative of the kind of faculty we want to be. But I'm not sure that collectively, if you put 30 people from the faculty into a room, you get a consistent impression of what our priorities are over the next 5 years. And I think that leads to some challenges as we make day-to-day decisions about our future. I think the second observation I made to the leadership team was that my sense is that the plans that we have largely are incremental changes to where we are now. And Vicky and Sinead have illustrated some of the major shifts that we need to make over the coming years. And I'm not convinced that the level of change that's in plans currently is enough to make that step change that we need to maintain pace with our competitors, let alone to begin to overtake them in terms of our reputation and standing in the academic community. So I think one of the things we need to do through the 5-year plan is to figure out where those big ticket opportunities are to make big changes to the positioning of the faculty. And as Vicky and Sinead have also hinted at, I think we also need to do some real work on what are the things that we're doing that add less value to the faculty than other things that we might be doing, and reprioritizing where we invest our time, our money, our energies into the things that are going to deliver most value. And the final observation I made was actually a reflection back of what I'd heard from many people in conversation, which is that although we're a faculty, we're the size of a small to medium research intensive university. And that's absolutely right. But I'm not sure that always feeds through into how we think about ourselves and our future. And I think there's some big questions for us to ask ourselves as we think about a 5-year horizon, about how we leverage that scale. Do we try to be very broad and cover every possible subdiscipline, every area of activity, or do we focus on where we can have real depth and excellence? And I think the other observation I made is that being the size of a university often leads to a bit of inertia and an emphasis on consistency rather than agility to change. I think thinking about how we make that step change to being more agile and responsive to opportunities is really important. So if that's what I think we need to look at, how are we going to do that? FLT have signed up to a kind of an iterative approach to building our 5-year plan, which will start with some pretty intensive work over the next month to agree what those core objectives are going to be for us as a faculty, and really adding some definition to the narrative that the faculty framework provides. That will then form the basis of some really detailed conversations with schools, divisions, operational units, to ask the question about, okay, if these are our priorities for change over the next 5 years, what does that mean in this individual area? What is it that we need to do so that collectively we're going to meet those ambitions? That takes us to mid-June. In many ways, that's a bit of a terrifying pace to have these conversations, because I'm well aware that we have exam period coming up, we have reopening of campus, discussions about what hybrid working might look like. But it's critical, both for our kind of standing and positioning within the university, but also in terms of keeping pace with the radical change that some of our competitors are undertaking at the moment, that we rapidly get a sense of where we want to head as a faculty. That will then lead to a presentation by Graham Ardeen to the board in early July, setting out this is where we want to get to over 5 years. Assuming that the board are broadly supportive of that, we'll then do a further stage of work up until kind of mid to late September, where we then begin to build out a more detailed plan of, okay, if this is what we said we're going to do over 5 years, what's the sequencing of that? What are we going to achieve by year 2, year 3? So that we don't get into a position of trying to make all the changes at the end of that 5-year period. We need to start building in that progression towards where we want to be starting from next year. And of course, as Sinead would want me to add as a reminder, alongside that, we'll be going through a continually iterative process of modeling the financial sustainability as part of that. I think a final thought that I want to leave with is that we need, as a faculty, to find a way to triangulate the pressures that we have on financial sustainability with maintaining our aspirations for absolute excellence across research, education, operations, and finding a plan which brings those two together is going to be what makes this a really successful 5-year plan. So I think that's everything I want to say, but I'm happy to take any questions. I think Vicky's gonna facilitate that discussion.
Yep. Thanks, Mark. Thank you. Thanks. So we've got a couple of comments and questions in the chat. Thank you for those. If people have got other things they want to ask or comment on, please feel free. If you don't want to share it with anybody, you can send it to me as a direct message, and I can ask things or make an observation as a anonymous thing. I know some people feel more comfortable with that. So question for Sinead, I think, from Rebecca Elliott. So she says, thanks, Sinead, that was really useful. In the final table, is other income from philanthropy or something else, and makes the comment that we're way behind FSE in that area. Sinead, are you there? Don't know if she's there or not. Sinead has gone. Liz, thank you. That would be really helpful if you could pick that up.
Hi. Sorry for my spelling mistake there. Yeah, Sinead, you've got to go off for another meeting.
Right.
The other income that she talked about in the table is other income that doesn't come from direct tuition fees and isn't research income. And actually, it's an area that's growing quite a lot, because especially where we're seeing things where people initially think it could be from research, so it could actually be being provided by somebody who would typically be a research funder, but because of the nature of the work that we do, where it's more of a service rather than some strict research, it ends up in the realm of other income. And this is an area where there's quite a lot of focus, because we're finding more and more people wanting us to do this work, but often they maybe don't want to pay the contribution to it. They might kind of, you know, sometimes you might see it materialising where trusts have got money left at the end of the year and they say, oh, we've got some money here. What could you do with it? What would you want to do with it? So I think that's what the other income is, rather than philanthropy. It tends to be something that's contracted. Generally, it's a one-off, but it can also be something like the kind of bigger pieces of work we do ongoing with the HEE, or even something like CPPE. So that's other income.
Okay, thanks, Liz. I think we do have some similar issues, though, around some of our philanthropic income, where, you know, understandably donors want to see that their money is going directly to something that they want to support, and there isn't that recognition of the broader kind of costs that we have around that. So I know that that's sometimes a challenge as well. So again, getting all these things lined up together is sometimes not entirely straightforward. Comment from or a question from Sarah Williams around how she'd love to be able to set PDR objectives for her team aligned to the faculty strategic plan. Here's a woman after my own heart. Could we have the 5-year plan, or at least the 21-22 objectives, ahead of the next round of PDRs in July?
So I think it'd be fair to say we're not going to have a detailed 5-year plan in time for PDRs in July. That work's going to be iterative through to the board approving that in early October. I would be keen, on the other hand, to be quite transparent and open about the emerging set of priorities that we're setting as a faculty. My kind of working assumption at this point is that we'll have a reasonable degree of consensus as a faculty on what those key priorities are by the time we get to July, not least because the board are expecting us to be able to set those out. So I think in terms of sharing the objectives over a kind of a 5-year window, I think is achievable. I don't think we'll be at the stage quite of being able to say, and this is what that looks like for year one. I think we're still going to be iterating through that. So I think the answer is, in part, this will help you shape PDRs, but I don't think there's going to be quite the kind of the straight kind of hierarchy of priorities and PDRs that aligns this year. I think that would be great to see as an ambition for future years. But I think the timing's not going to quite work out this year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's something that we could kind of, you know, just remind people about, where when we're getting into PDRs, that it should be linked back to kind of, you know, emerging priorities, that's the thing. And Denise Ogden's made a comment that, you know, when she used to work at another university, PDR objectives were tied to the strategic plan, and everyone felt they were part of a much bigger picture. I've had a similar experience elsewhere. I'm sure others have as well. Question that's come directly to me around the 5-year plan was high level, and this person felt quite vague. I think that's a fair comment. It was very much a kind of a framework rather than detailed plans. When will there be more specific details, and what can staff do now to help, and who's going to be engaged? I'll pass over to Mark about the kind of question about kind of staff engagement and how what we see coming out of this in a bit more detail. But it's probably worth saying that we did start to put together some what we were calling implementation plans that identified the priorities, and that's partly what Mark's talking about, where he's saying there's too many priorities. And I think we went from a very high level framework of direction of travel down to a lot of detail quite quickly, and what we're trying to do now is effectively fill in the middle. But I'll pass over to Mark to just comment on kind of the how we're doing that, and what that means for people's kind of involvement in this.
Yeah, so I think I suppose that there's two parts of this. One is kind of the information sharing, and the second part is how we're going to engage. On the kind of information sharing about progress, certainly I'd be keen, although I realise that I haven't discussed this with those who schedule and plan these meetings, but I'd be keen that over the coming months, at every one of these open meetings, we provide an update on where we are in terms of the the evolution of the 5-year plan, so that there's a constant flow of information. And of course, there'll also be information flowed down through the normal management route as well. So in terms of being connected to what's going on, I'm hoping that we can be quite transparent and open about the conversations that we're having. That's certainly always been my approach elsewhere. In terms of how we're going to engage people, and this feeling like a slightly flimsy plan, I suppose just to reassure you that there is a more detailed plan for how this building of the 5-year plan is going to happen. And I didn't think anyone wanted to go through a 35-line project plan. And that very much does involve broadening out engagement. And I think if you have in your minds the kind of the 3 major steps that I had in the kind of the plan for how we make a plan. The first was agreeing our core objectives. And I think I would see that initially being largely at a leadership team level, bringing together the generation of ideas that have come through the various other documents that have been produced to synthesize, okay, across what we're doing, this is what we're aiming for. So I think that next few weeks of agreeing these are our core objectives will very much be a kind of a leadership at school faculty level, engaging with heads of division. As we then broaden out that discussion to look at the implications of those objectives for individual schools, divisions, units, I think that's the point at which the conversation becomes broader, and we begin to engage with people about actually how we're going to deliver this, what are the implications for how we need to change. And then I think as after the initial board meeting in July, we get into actually what does this look like as we plan out over the 5-year window, what we're going to do each year. I think that conversation broadens another step. And so I think that there'll be a gradual widening of engagement as we broaden our thinking. I think the other thing to say is that although we're talking about agreeing on core objectives over the next few weeks, I've been talking to FLT about seeing those as design principles rather than as a final decision. I think it's clear that as we begin to have more detailed conversations with schools and divisions, that will adjust the overall thinking somewhat as new ideas are generated and people test some of the leadership assumptions. And so I think it won't really be until we get to June and we've had those more detailed conversations and wider conversations that those priorities become something which is more absolute in its definition. So yeah, very, very keen for this to be a process which engages across section. You just need to have a little bit of patience while we get there. And hopefully at the next open meeting, I'll be able to say a bit more about what that's going to look like over the coming months.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Final question just before we finish, from Brian. Does the FLT feel the inclusion of grade ceilings for staff has demotivated some staff from being willing to follow, develop or actively input into strategic plans? I'm not entirely sure what we mean by inclusion of grade ceilings. We've always had gradings that have had a beginning and an end, so I'm not sure why that's different. What I would say more generally is, I think we talk too much about grade in this university, and other people have made that same comment to me. I am very clearly of the view that people have a role to do. It is graded, and what we need is the best contribution from people in their role. And to be blunt, I'm not interested in what grade somebody is. I'm interested in their skill sets, their experience, their knowledge, and their ability to input into the areas of work. So I would hope that people do not feel demotivated and want to be engaged with things. Absolutely everybody should be able to make a contribution one way or another. to what we do here. It is about utilising the brilliant people that we have, their skill set, their experience, their knowledge, to get the best for the faculty and the university. And if people feel that they are being stopped from doing that, then I and the FLT and the PS leadership team want to know about that, because that should not be happening. We should be encouraging everyone to be engaged with things. This is not a grade issue. It is about your skill set, your knowledge, your experience, your contribution. And I'd like to finish by just kind of saying again, thank you to everybody. You know, I think everyone is doing a fabulous job in, you know, ongoing uncertainty and everything else that's going on. Thank you all for your contribution. I hope you find that helpful. As I've been listening to that, the more I see it, the more I'm thinking, actually on the intranet, this is a really helpful just overview of where we are around the finances and the planning that we should just share more widely across the faculty. So again, as Mark says, we'll keep updating you on our progress on this. Thanks again. I don't want to overrun, so have a good day, everybody. Thank you for your ongoing contribution and take care. Thanks very much.